Hey everybody, how y'all doing? If my voice sounds a little hoarse, it's because I've been hollering at my wife to hurry up and get that oil changed in my diesel. It's 1,000 miles past due and I've been on her to get it done for a week, and she's taking too long to do it. But y'all didn't come here to listen to that. You came here for some good stories, and that's what we're going to do. Got 2 really great handwritten letters that were sent to me. They showed up in my post office box over the last couple of months, and I thought, well, when I get 2 of them together, I'm going to do those in one video, and that's what we're doing today. All right, here we go. All right. There are 2 handwritten letters here. The first one is from Denise and Lisa from North Georgia. Denise writes, "We love your show. My friend Lisa and I got together to tell a few short stories about the habituation of Bigfoot on her home place at the very end of a long winding road in the sticks. There's a lot going on out there for many, many years. There are tons of stories down here. There are stories about Zebulon, a cop's encounter that was on Sasquatch Chronicles." I keep hearing that name. Who are these people? Stories locally about Bigfoot out in Barnesville, 30 minutes away from us, and in Milner, Georgia, which is next to Barnesville, Georgia. So they are here. They're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain. And the first encounter is from Lisa. Actually, all of these are Lisa's encounters, and Denise is writing them for her, and it's just really, I just love this. Lisa says, "I was 9 years old when I had my encounter. I live in Thomaston, Georgia. My family's homestead is off the lower South US 19. I'll start by telling you this. I never even heard of a Bigfoot. What I came upon was a total shock to me. It affects me to this day. It was the summer of 1974. On Saturdays and sometimes Sundays, my father's best friend and his 2 boys would come to visit us. The boys were like cousins. We called their dad Uncle. We would run around, play in the woods, and go down to the creek and splash in the cool water. The creek was about a quarter-mile walk down a dirt road. We played there so often, and we were never, ever afraid. My dad told me to run and get the boys at the creek. It was time for them to go, so that's what I did. As I was walking about a third of the way there, I saw something to my right. First, let me say, there's a small branch, as we called it, to my right. It dips down and sometimes has water in it. There's a rise up into the tree line about 4 or 5 feet up. And then it gets dark, and it's a bunch of trees, like a forest. Our place was surrounded by thousands of acres to the south and west. Out from the darkness steps a giant, quote, thing, unquote. It was as shocked to see me as I was to see it. We stood there frozen, just staring at each other, wide-eyed and mouths open. This thing was huge. I couldn't move a muscle. I thought if I moved, then it would eat me. It must have been 20 or 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I kept pressing my eyes closed and then opened again and again. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I just couldn't believe that I was looking at this giant hairy animal. I finally thought, one of us has to move, so I took off back to the house as fast as I could run. I bolted in the door, hysterically crying and out of breath. I tried to tell my family what had happened. I couldn't get the words out. My family were all yelling at me. "What happened? What's wrong?" My dad was really upset, and you didn't want to upset my dad because he had a terrible temper. And then Mom hollered, "Everyone stop yelling and be quiet. Let me settle her down." When I caught my breath, I said, There's a big hairy bear with a man's face. It was standing on the ridge up on the road." Still, I was hysterically crying. The men took off with guns and the dogs into the truck. It came out of the woods on 2 feet. It was staring at me, I said. Looking back, it had to be 30 feet away. None of us ever heard of Bigfoot. I never looked back. I was afraid it would run after me. I remember it like it was yesterday. If I ever talk about it, I still have bad dreams to this day. The men said that it was gone. My folks said anytime the family went to hunt or fish, there were strange sounds, even loud tree falls. They would joke and chalk it up as the ghost that lived in the woods. They said that many times our dogs turned up missing, our livestock killed, or there were hogs missing. Once I saw our cow with its neck turned backwards on the ground. Its eyes were bulged out and its tongue was hanging out. What could do that? We lost chickens, dogs, hogs, one horse, and one cow. My dad blamed it on hunters, but we never knew a creature like that lived that close to us and was doing this. My family still lives there, way south of town, but as for me, I will always live in town. And she signs it Lisa. Now that's her first story. Oh my God, I know, look, I'm laughing. It's just cute. I can hear her telling me this story, and that's what I'm getting a chuckle out of. I'm not laughing at her horror of this creature. Here's another one of her encounters. My 3 older sisters took a walk after dinner years later down the main dirt road towards the highway. Not far, maybe just a half a mile. Something huge plunged down out of the tree into the woods and in the dark brush. Boom! It landed so hard, breaking branches on the way down. They ran screaming home. It was bipedal and paralleled them almost all the way home. Needless to say, they never went out close to dark ever again. That was encounter 2. Those are her sisters experiencing Bigfoot on their property. Okay, now in the spring of 2018, which is pretty recent, my friend Denise and I and my 2 young boys and one visiting cousin were going to camp out on the property halfway from our old house and the creek in a nice one-room cabin with a surrounding porch that my brother built. I made a huge bonfire after dinner. I lit it up and went to bed in our sleeping bags. About 3 a.m., there's a quiet tap, tap, tap like a fingernail on the window. The 2 dogs were asleep under the cabin, went nuts, but stayed under the cabin. Denise was fast asleep, and the kids were asleep as well. But me, I was wide awake and scared to death. I wanted my friend across the room to wake up so bad. She just kept sleeping. No one else lives out there but my sister. She would drive down, but she's too scared because she knew what it was. In the morning, we walked up to the house and asked her if she came down to the cabin in the middle of the night to scare us. And she said, "Are you nuts? No way. I'm not going anywhere out here in the dark." And that was story number 3. More activity on their place. Okay, now for story number 4. This is December 2018, about 9 months ago. My cousin Doug was at the home place and was out front of the first home my family had many, many years ago. It's real small, so he thought I'll stay there next to my cousin and her 2 kids in a bigger home. One night after Christmas in 2018, he was on the small front porch at about 11 p.m. leaning against the post. He was facing the end of the long road, which is now paved, facing a 10-foot rise and the tree line. All of a sudden, something huge let out a scream so loud that it was like a giant emergency warning alarm. We still have those in our town. He dropped his cigarette, ran inside, and locked the doors, got all his guns out and loaded them and laid them on his bed. He was shaking really badly. He closed all the blinds and curtains and stayed up all night. It was so loud that it hurt his ears. His aunt, who lives up on a hill across Highway 19, called him the next day and asked, "Did you hear that loud scream? It sounded like it came from your way." Now he's a believer. I guess these creatures are still here. And that's the end of the 4th encounter. Girls, those are great stories, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you actually handwriting these out and mailing them to me. They're awesome, and apparently your area has a lot of activity for years and years and years, and apparently they're not hurting people, they're just scaring people. Looks like you got a family of Bigfoot living in your county there, girls, so just be careful when you go out there. I love y'all. Thank you so much for sending that in. I know everyone that heard it enjoyed it. Okay, for handwritten letter number 2, this one is from Rusty. And Rusty has written a really great account of some remarkable things that have happened to him. We're just going to get into it. He titles it, Bigfoot Hates Tweakers. Many years ago, I was invited to go hunting in southeast Oklahoma. I worked with a guy that invited me, but did not really know the others. The coworker remains my best friend to this day. We all met at the same spot for about 3 seasons. Then for different reasons, it was just me. I didn't mind, I loved it, and it was a good spot. This place is for public hunting in the Ouachita Mountains. It's also famous for Bigfoot sightings. For all my years in the woods, I've gained a lot of skills and experience. I was sure that if anyone could find Bigfoot, it would be me. Up until this point, I never had any definite proof. I have, however, seen and heard things that I could not explain, so I keep an open mind. The first couple of solo trips were uneventful. I never worried about anything. I was always armed with a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. The rifle was with me in the woods, the shotgun rested on a chair while in camp, and the pistol never left my side. My trips were well planned, so I always had more than enough provisions to last the whole time. Sometimes I'd stay as long as a month. That's how much I loved it. Now that I think about it, weird things started happening the first time I went alone. A chair or a tool or other small things would be in a different spot when I returned to camp. Nothing missing, it was just moved. I just put it down as absent-mindedness on my part. And then one day it started. First it was a small rock that landed about 10 feet away. I was sitting in a chair sharpening my knife and sipping on a beer. I looked in the direction from which it came and I saw nothing. I didn't hear anything either. I mean nothing, no birds or anything. It was unnerving to say the least. After a few minutes I picked up the same rock and I threw it back where it came from. There you go. It took several minutes, but to my surprise, the same exact rock came back almost in the same spot that it landed the first time. I didn't sleep that night, but I was on high alert. The next morning, I was cold and went to the wood pile so I could stoke the fire and get a pot of coffee going. I grabbed a log, but on the chopping block, I saw it. It was a small figure crudely fashioned out of pine needles. I picked it up and studied it. 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. That's when all of my anxiety faded away. I held it up, and looking around, I said, "Thank you." I was sure that whatever had left it meant me no harm. Things like this happened for the next 3 or 4 years. We even started exchanging gifts. It left an arrowhead one time. Another time, just a shiny rock from the river, which was about a mile away. In exchange, I would leave an apple or some cookies. The small rock throwing also continued, like a game that we both enjoyed. I never saw it, but I could sense when it was there. We had become friends. I always camped in the same spot, and this year was the same. I was always pumped for deer season, especially to visit my friend again. It always waited until I was finished setting up camp and could sit down for a little rest. Then the rock tossing game would start again. It had become our thing. About a half hour before dark, though, we both heard it. It was an old pickup with a bad exhaust leak screaming down the main gravel road. Not really unusual. Everyone knew about the meth problems in that part of the state. What was unusual, it came straight into my camp. It slid to a stop right in front of me. When the dust cleared, I could see them, 4 males between about 16 and 40, all sitting in an 80 model Chevy single cab pickup truck. I wasn't too worried, the shotgun was close by. When they all got out at the same time, I knew it was tweakers. And man, were they on it. They all acted like they had spiders on their clothes and in their hair. The driver, I thought, his eyeballs were going to explode. Well, in their agitated state and almost incoherent speech, they said I was on their private property. I knew they saw the shotgun that was within my reach, so without getting up or raising my voice, I said, "No, this is public land. I've been hunting here for years." That's when they got really wound up. They all started yelling at the same time and started in my direction. But before I got my hand on the shotgun, I saw something big fly through the air from my right. It was a basketball-sized boulder. It crashed into the driver's side bed of the truck. It was loud and it scared them more than me, only because I saw it coming. One of them fell on the ground in a stupor. The other three turned to look at the giant dent in the side of the truck. That gave me a couple of extra seconds to grab the shotgun and stand up. When they turned back towards me, they were looking at the business end of a Remington 870. We all stood staring at each other for what seemed like an hour. It was in fact only a second or two. Then came the loudest, scariest noise I had ever heard in my life. Kind of a roar plus a scream, and it hurt my ears. As they were staring at me, I calmly said, "You boys get on." They picked the one up from the ground, scrambled back in the pickup, and slung rocks getting out of there. When we couldn't hear the truck anymore, I sat back down in my chair and had a shot of whiskey. By this time it was dark. I sat there in the dark trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Should I stay or should I go? What should I do? That's when I heard a familiar sound. My friend tossed a small rock that landed near my feet. I laughed out loud and threw the same rock back. I slept off and on that night with Mr. Remington in my lap, but unafraid. The next morning, I had decided to go ahead and leave. It wasn't safe for my friend and I, so I got up, I made coffee and breakfast, and had one last game of rock toss. I was packed up and ready to leave about 10 a.m. I knew he was still there, although I never saw him. But right before I left, I took everything I planned as gifts for him and left it on the chopping block. In return, I found the rock that we played our game with. I said goodbye in a soft voice, and I left. That was about 15 years ago. I never went back to that spot. Since then, I've camped and hunted in a lot of different places from Oklahoma to North Carolina. Whenever I'm sure I'm alone, I'll pick up a small rock and throw it towards the thick part of the woods, but it never comes back. This is a true story. Believe it or leave it alone. And he writes, P.S. I miss my friend. I hope he is well. I still have 3 weeks of vacation, so I went to another part of Oklahoma. But that's another story. Someday I'll tell you about the snake and the squirrel. Rusty, that is a great story, man. That is a wonderful story. I mean, I was just right there with you. That was great. I know about those tweakers. Man, those meth heads, they're just goofy. And sometimes they get a little pushy with you. And you got to use some coercion to get them away from you. So, good thing well, let's put it this way. Good thing your friend had that big rock in his hand. That sure distracted him. But anyway, Rusty, it's a great story. Thank you for handwriting it. And if you want to send in the snake and the squirrel story, I will put it in a video on this channel. All right, man. Thanks a lot. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. I really appreciate you all watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.